All right, Daniel chapter 6. We'll start in verse 1 and go through to verse 5. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find in connection with the law of his God." So King Nebuchadnezzar's dream has come true. It's come to pass. The dream of the great image and the golden head being taken over by the silver chest, which represented the Persians and the Medes, has come to pass. The Persians and the Medes has destroyed the kingdom of Babylon. Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian are now reigning in Babylon. The one great king Belshazzar has been murdered, and Babylon has fallen to another. As great of a nation that Babylon was, it's hard to imagine to see the greatest nation of the world being brought to nothing, and pretty much almost overnight of them sneaking in and overtaking them. And really the Babylonians were good at warfare, and they were good at defense as far as being geographically situated and having good, strong walls, but they weren't necessarily good in defense as far as having people on the other side. They were busy celebrating and rejoicing in their sovereignty, because really they got prideful. They figured, well, even if someone could get over across, how are they going to wipe us out? Sure enough, they were wiped out. They were taken over by their pride. But the language that is used by Babylon being destroyed, Babylon being defeated, was not so much that they've been outsmarted by the Medes and by the Persians. It was rather that Daniel describes the king of Belshazzar being given over to the Medes and Persians. So some would understand this siege as being that the Persians and Medes were just smarter or stronger or better than the Babylonians. They took over, they had the siege as victory by great military prowess, but Daniel knew that God was really the one who was behind the Medes and the Persians overtaking Babylon. So the kingdom was handed over by God due to their pride and neglect of true worship to the one true God. They thought it could have been, the Medes and the Persians could have boasted in their own military power, but it was really the fact that Babylon was being judged by God. Do you have something?
Well, it makes total sense when you look back to history.
Yeah.
Because Nebuchadnezzar was aware of the power of God.
Yeah.
And still ignored it.
Mm-hmm.
Said these things, we're going to do this, everybody has to worship this God, and then didn't follow through.
Yeah.
So he had to see it coming.
Yeah.
You would think he would see it coming. He had the dream, it was prophesied to him. He had to see it coming.
Oh, yeah. And then, well, for Nebuchadnezzar, and now after his death, I mean, he finally did have this great conversion, but then you have this period where extra biblical material tells us that his sons do take over momentarily, but just for a few months. But his sons are completely pagan and do things very different. And then Belshazzar is even going so far. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar at the end of his reign outlaws worship, or if anyone speaks anything against Daniel's God, they're to be punished. And then take it a few years later, and Belshazzar comes on the scene, and he's wanting to take all the treasures of the temple and use them as cups to drink from.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's just how far it's fallen. Like, it makes you wonder how the nation would have been different if it would have been still under Nebuchadnezzar. But of course, I mean, Nebuchadnezzar can only live for so long. And so by the time he dies, and some other pagan kings take over. And which Daniel tells Belshazzar that, he says that because you have been high and lifted up and have not acknowledged the true God, your kingdom is being handed over to you by God. It's being handed over to someone else. And as he was telling them that, the Persians were sneaking in and taking over the kingdom at that very night. The kingdom was handed over by God due to their pride and neglect of worship. And most of us grow up with aspirations of what we want our life to be like. So we all have this trajectory of how we want our lives to be like. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we all have something in the back of our minds that tell us, these are my dreams, these are my goals, these are the ways that I would like my life to go. And as we look upon those years down the road, whether some of them are fulfilled, whether some of them not, or whether some of them were still goals and still dreams that we're still trying to fulfill, I don't think that this was necessarily Daniel's dream. 70 years have passed from Daniel's exile. Daniel's up there in years, and now he's witnessed a lot. I don't think this was Daniel's goal and dream as he was growing up as a child, being taught in the ways of the Lord, being known that even children possess this kind of knowledge. Children possess this kind of dream. You ask any child, what do you want to do when you grow up? All children will tell you something that they want to grow up. For me, I wanted to be my description was I wanted to be a fireman and I wanted to fight tornadoes. So I don't know how in kindergarten how those things work side by side, but that was my dream as a child. And Daniel probably didn't expect his life to go like this, in this direction. He was exiled, held captive for years in a foreign land since his youth. And the people of Israel were taught that being held by the Gentiles was a punishment, a form of punishment by God. Jerusalem, his home had been, or Judah, his home had been laid waste. Jerusalem, the precious city of God, had been destroyed. The temple was raided, and they were defeated by a pagan king nonetheless. So he was forced to learn the language and history of his captors. And as he rises to a high level in the social ladder of Babylon, he sees once again another country come over, wipe out their king, take out their kingdom, and now a different kingdom takes over. This was surely not part of his plan and his dream. This is probably not what he had in mind as he was growing up. And Darius now, the king of the Medes, is setting up a new kingdom. But Daniel is still given this high place. So as Darius is going around and he notices the high officials that are in place, he sets 120, and then over those 120 that are over military and predominantly finances, he sets 3 people that he terms as high officials that he sets over that those 120 are accountable to. Daniel is one of those 3. Now, he could have put Daniel at a lower level, or he could have not even considered him. Daniel was up there in years, but he saw the wisdom of Daniel, and it says because there is an excellent spirit in him. Darius saw that, and Darius wanted him eventually to be over all of the kingdom. Daniel was above the other 2, so not only was Daniel honored to be one of the 3 high officials, but also Daniel was considered to be the best of them all because he had an excellent spirit in him. God had anointed him for this service. God had blessed him with utter wisdom. And the king even planned to eventually have him transition to be ruler over all of the kingdom. However, the king's sentiment was not felt by all. Some tried to find fault with Daniel. This is really the game of politics. This is the game of trying to dig up dirt on someone, so people gather together and they say, we have to get rid of Daniel. They get jealousy of his promotion. They're jealous of him being blessed by the Lord, and so they want to try and dig up dirt on him, which, like I said, is the game of politics, is it not, of trying to find. Let's see what we can find. What kind of skeletons can we find in Daniel's closet? Surely there has to be something there. Daniel's been here in Babylon for a while. He was exiled as a young man, so he's lived here long enough to surely make some big mistakes, and he's been a government employee for a while. Surely he has some dirt on him. So all we have to do is go and try and find something in his life that is inconsistent with him. Unfortunately for them, they don't find any. They don't find one thing to grab a hold on Daniel's life. There was nothing hidden in Daniel's life. There was nothing in it which was shady or crooked or perverse that they could point out and say, this is your Daniel. This is the guy who you're going to have rule over your kingdom. You can't have him rule. He's perverse. He's crooked. He's corrupt. They went looking for dirt and ended up finding out that he had a clean record. Doesn't mean he was perfect, but there was nothing really big that they could really point to show Darius that, hey, this is your guy that you really want to promote. They realized, though, that the only thing that they're ever going to get Daniel on is if they get something concerning his faith. They figure if they can get something on Daniel concerning, as they refer to it, in connection with the law of his God, then we have him. That's the only thing that they have on him. What a life. May it be said of us that the only way for us to be tripped or to be trapped is for it to be concerning our devotion to Christ. How strong of a life that must be. How firm of a foundation that must be upon the faithfulness of God. That the only ground that your enemies have to try and grab a hold of is to say if we can try and trip them up in their faith because they're so faithful. So they devised a plan. Verse 6. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. So they're trying to butter him up. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. They really like different forms of torture being thrown into a brain. A fiery furnace and den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. So they have the document right in their hand. They have it prepared. They just need the king to sign it. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction, which is similar to the Chaldeans coming to King Nebuchadnezzar back in Daniel chapter 3 to accuse Daniel's companions of not bowing down to the golden image. They said, hey, we saw those Jews over there. You know how everybody's supposed to bow down, and if they don't, they're going to get thrown into a fiery furnace. Yeah, those Jews over there, they're not bowing down, so they deserve that punishment. The wicked were jealous of the blessing of Daniel. They wanted to destroy him, so they fed the king's ego, declaring that he should make a law that he and only he should be worshipped for 30 days. You kind of have to be on a little bit of an ego trip to agree to something like that. Like you're the only person that should. I'm the one who's to be worshipped for 30 days. They do give a time limit on it, so they're kind of respectful in that degree. It's not something that's eternal. But in their law, the king listens directly from the gods, and the God's first decree that's given to the king is infallible and perfect. So if the gods give the king a decree, and the decree is given and the law is signed, once it's enacted, it can't be changed. So they mentioned that once this is here, it's forever, which of course they did give the time limit of 30 days. But it doesn't mean as though the king can't change it now, which he isn't supposed to. They suggested the punishment of breaking this law should be a lion's den. The king agrees and signs the document, which the king could not even go back and change the law once he made it. He had to save face, really. Part of it's PR, and also part of it is their religion said that they couldn't change it. Verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber, open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Now I love the author mentioning there when Daniel knew that the document had been signed. He goes back and this is it's not. Yeah, exactly. He knows that it's been signed. He knows that he's going to get thrown in the lion's den. So the response to that is he goes and prays like he always does. I mean, it doesn't faze him. He's just, it's prayer time. Let me go and pray. And he opens up his windows. He doesn't try and do it sneakily. He doesn't try and get around it. He isn't trying to do it in the shadows in the dark. And that's what I think they could have tried to do it a little bit. Well, it's still my faith, but it's a secret faith, and nobody has to know about it. He could have closed his windows that time. No, he left his windows wide open, which not only for him, I guess it meant that he faces toward Jerusalem, but also is probably an aspect of, hey, everybody, he's praying out loud as he's bowing down, praying to the Lord of heaven and earth, which I wonder if he always had his windows open. I don't know. It almost makes me kind of wonder. I mean, I don't think there's anything that would say necessarily either or, but I wonder if there's a special hint there that he opened up his windows this time to really make sure that he probably knew those people were listening. And so, hey, everybody, I'm doing this out in the open. Now, Daniel's faithfulness is unmoved by this document being signed, even though he knew the fate one would suffer if one did not obey this law and worship anyone other than Darius. But he still prayed to the Lord. He was still faithful. He prayed with open windows and faced toward Jerusalem. Now, why did he do it toward Jerusalem? Well, I think the key there is the prayer that Solomon gives in 1 Kings chapter 8 of the dedication of the temple that he builds. In verse 46 of 1 Kings chapter 8, one of the things that King Solomon prays is that if anybody's in a foreign land, and they're held captive, if we've sinned against you, may they pray toward this land and may they be restored. And I think Daniel knew that, and Daniel was praying concerning that. Verse 46 of 1 Kings chapter 8, this is Solomon's prayer to the Lord concerning Israel, which was a united kingdom at that time. He was praying, if they sin against you, talking about Israel to the Lord, for there is no one who does not sin, and you are angry with them, and give them to an enemy, so that they are carried away captive to the land of the enemy, far off or near, yet if they turn their heart in the land to which they have been carried captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captors, saying, we have sinned and acted perversely and wickedly. If they repent with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their enemies, who carry them captive, and pray to you toward their land, which you gave to their fathers, the city that you have chosen, the house that I have built for your name, then hear in heaven your dwelling place their prayer and their plea, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you, and all their transgressions that they have committed against you. And grant them compassion in the sight of those who have carried them captive, that they may have compassion on them. For they are your people and your heritage, which you have brought out of Egypt from the midst of the iron furnace. Let your eyes be open to the plea of your servant, the plea of your people Israel, giving ear to them whenever they call to you. For you separated them from among all the peoples there to be your heritage, as you declared through Moses your servant, when you brought out your fathers out of Egypt, O Lord God. How prophetic of a prayer is that? Because that is exactly what is happening with Daniel. King Solomon is saying, way before the time of Daniel, that if people are taken because of their sin captive to another land, and if they pray from that land to this land, toward this land, then may you hear from heaven, hear and have compassion, and return them to their land and bless them. Exactly what Daniel... Now, we're not told exactly what Daniel is praying when they catch him, but this is probably part of it. It mentions that he prays multiple times a day, and this was his regular custom. This is exactly what was happening. Verse 11, then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Now, I believe these men knew that this was Daniel's prayer time. They knew his devotional time. They knew this is the time that Daniel regularly does this. So they figure, way back up there in verse 5, that they knew that if they could find a law, it had to be in connection with his God. They figure if we can make it where it hinges on his devotional time, we have it. So they come up, they hear him pray, and they say, we got him now, boys. This is it. So then they go and report what he's done to the king. He's broke the law of the land, and now they report him to be thrown to the lions. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, should be cast in the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Now Daniel could have waited after the 30 days to pray. Could have moved his prayer time to very early in the morning or very late at night, in which people probably wouldn't have come up to him and heard him. Could have been more secretive, could have closed his window. But he didn't choose to take the easy road. He didn't choose the easy route. He stayed faithful to the Lord, and he stayed faithful in a bold way. He could have tried to stay faithful in just a more secretive way, but he wanted to remain bold in his faith. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. It was really troubling him. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. They want to remind him that I know you're trying to figure out a way, because they know he likes Daniel. That's why they had to trap him in this. And they know that he's not going to get rid of him just by any other way. So they say, this is something that you have put in the law and it cannot be changed. This is the punishment, king. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast in the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, and I love this part, even though this king is very pagan and he doesn't understand this yet, later on comes to a better understanding of it, but he still says to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. He's really having that inner struggle of, what do I do? I like Daniel. Daniel's a good guy. I don't want this to happen, Daniel, but at the same time, if people just go around breaking my law, where does it end? And if I let this slide, then surely it's going to be said that I let it slide because Daniel is just a favorite of mine. But he's really having a hard time with it. He's really struggling. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. That'd be exciting to hear. Someone that you knew that you didn't want. Think to yourself of what it would be like to enact a law which you were enforced to throw your friend into a den of lions and then not get any sleep all night and worry and be to the point of exhaustion. You get up to the dawn, the breaking of dawn, you come up to that pit and you're hoping that some way that your friend has survived. And he says, O king, live forever. How rejoiced the king must have felt that Daniel has survived. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found in him, because he had trusted in his God. Much like when his companions were thrown into the fire and they came out, there was no hair that was singed. There was not even the smell of smoke that came from them. There was no trace. Even for Daniel, there was no scratch on him. There was nothing about him that indicated. Not only did the lions not eat him, but also there was no scratch on him. That shows God's protective providence. And the king commanded those men. So this is part, when this is told as a children's story, this is the part that's not necessarily so much reflected upon. But the king commanded those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast. I know she doesn't like this part either. Were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Also reflective of the previous event of Daniel's companions. And the men that bound them up, throw them in the flames. The flames licked them, consumed them, killed them. But Daniel's friends were thrown into the very fiery furnace and yet survived. And Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, survived. And yet the men who tried to get him killed by the lions were. And Darius goes so far as to even wipe out their whole family. Punishes even their kinsmen for doing this. And they are not spared. They are destroyed by the lions. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. So he's doing something very similar to Nebuchadnezzar did. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So Daniel was delivered by his God, and he was delivered powerfully. Now Hebrews 11:33 says that Daniel was able to stop the mouths of the lions by faith. And Daniel 6:22 says that God sent his angel, shut the mouths of lions, because Daniel had been found blameless before him. And it says that he was, which doesn't mean that he was perfect. It doesn't mean that Daniel had never sinned, but it meant that Daniel was faithful and that he was upright. Verse 23 says that no harm was found to him because he had trusted in his God. So through all of that, being found blameless, trusted in his God, and he had faith. And we may not necessarily think of Daniel being in there and spared by his faith that God had used, but Hebrews saw it as that God had spared him because of his faith. He stopped the mouths of lions by Daniel's faith and his faithfulness. Daniel was found faithful even when it cost him his very life. Daniel could have looked at his exile and blamed God, as I'm sure some of the Jews did, that when the enemy came in, as Babylon came in and wiped out them and their family, everything that they loved, they could have screamed out to God that you have abandoned us. God, we are your chosen people, and you have allowed a pagan army to come in and wipe us out. You did not keep your covenant. But Daniel knew that Judah fell, not because of God's covenant unfaithfulness, but because of their own covenant unfaithfulness. They were not faithful to God, and so God allowed them to be disciplined by the Babylonians. And really, someone pointed this out to me, and it's very fascinating that there is some similarities between Daniel and Jesus. And they're both of their lives in this instance in which they had. Daniel was persecuted by high officials. Jesus was also persecuted by high officials. Daniel was persecuted, thrown away by a king that struggled. He had an inner struggle with wanting to, he didn't want to break the law, but at the same time he wanted to spare his friend. When we think of Pilate, that Pilate had that inner struggle. You can tell. And old Pilate's, wicked and he's corrupt, but there's still this side of him and his humanity that he knew that Jesus was innocent. And he said, I'm not going to, and then he did that ceremonial act of washing his hands. And he said that may his blood be on you, which they were fine with. They said, let his blood be on us and on our children. The Pharisees were fine with it. But Pilate was not so much fine with it. So Darius struggled with it. Pilate struggled with it, nevertheless did it. Now Daniel was thrown into a den, into the ground of the earth. Christ was placed into a tomb. Daniel was raised up out of the den, and much like that, Jesus was raised in his resurrection out of the ground in the tomb, as the scriptures mention it. Mentioned this, although the tomb would have been level and at some level of the ground, but it describes it as Jesus raising from the ground. May we be found faithful, even if it costs us our lives. Daniel was unmoved by the king's edict. During a fiery trial, may we not always, during a fiery trial, we may not always be delivered like Daniel was, like Daniel's companions were. Paul writes about him being delivered in his own time in 2 Timothy 4. He mentions that, he says this, at my first offense no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through the message might be fully proclaimed and the Gentiles might hear it. Well, this is where he says, so I was rescued from the lion's mouth, very indicative of Daniel. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Now, Paul said this at the end of his life. 2 Timothy being the last of his letters. Paul said that God delivered me from Alexander the coppersmith, that he meant harm to me. He delivered me from that. He's going to deliver me from every evil action. Now, when he was saying that, I believe by the Spirit that he knew that he was about to be beheaded by Nero. He mentions that I've ran the race, I've kept the faith, I've finished my course. Now is my end. So he knew that he wasn't going to be, in the regular sense, being delivered from that instance. But he does say that God is going to deliver me out of all harm, bring me safely into his kingdom. So in a strange way, we might not see it, well, Paul, you really wasn't delivered. I mean, your head was severed from your body. But in Paul's mind, he was delivered, in a sense. God had delivered him out of darkness into new life in Jesus Christ. And the ultimate delivery was bringing him out of that death, in which that body, he said in 2 Corinthians, that his body was always given over to death, and then he'd be brought into new life in Christ's kingdom. Now, we may not always see as our ultimate deliverance being, as soon as we're brought into a fiery furnace, into a trial, we may think that it'd be nice if God just brings us out of every trial and into safety. But it doesn't always work that way. Actually, rarely does it work that way, right? Instantaneous. I mean, sometimes there's time that goes before that deliverance, or maybe we never get delivered here on this earth from that trial. But we have to learn how to persevere and to be steadfast in the midst of that trial. When we are surrounded by our own lions, may we stay faithful. May our hope in the one who is raised from the dead be strong, be steadfast. And may we incorporate a consistent level of faithfulness like Daniel. He didn't change his commitment to prayer, even though it was very costly for him. Even though it was dangerous to his life, he didn't change his commitment. Outside circumstances change around us all the time, but may our devotion to Jesus never change, no matter our outside circumstances. Consider the irony that the king Darius had less sleep than Daniel had, being in the lion's den. Darius was in his palace, the finest of luxuries, and yet he was pacing all night, fasting, didn't sleep, had probably the best bed of all the kingdom, and yet it said that sleep fled from him. And yet I think Daniel slept just fine, because angels were there holding the mouth of the lions. Yeah, just cuddled right up to it, yeah. May we be found faithful as God gives us grace.